When a woman doesn't worry about you, it's not always because she's secure. Sometimes it's because she's certain, and certainty, while comforting, can be the death of desire. Certainty removes the element of surprise, of possibility. It turns a living, breathing relationship into something static, predictable, safe, and ultimately forgettable. Women don't desire what they fully possess. They desire what they almost understand, what they're still discovering, still reading, still reaching for. This isn't manipulation, it's human nature. We are drawn to the unknown because it activates curiosity. And curiosity is the spark that keeps connection alive. So what does that mean in the context of love? It means this: when you are emotionally available all the time, when your behavior is entirely predictable, your tone always reassuring, your presence guaranteed, you remove the very tension that makes someone lean in. You become emotionally obvious. And while that might feel noble, even romantic, can actually rob a woman of the emotional intrigue she needs to feel magnetized toward you. There's a difference between being consistent and being predictable. Consistency is grounded, it builds trust. But predictability, emotional sameness, performative vulnerability, the inability to surprise can slowly kill attraction. And what happens when a woman is no longer surprised by you? She stops thinking about you, she stops wondering, and ultimately she stops worrying. Worry, in this context, isn't about fear or insecurity, it's about investment. It's the subtle anxiety that says, I don't want to lose this connection. I want to understand what's going on inside of him. I want to matter. And ironically, she only begins to worry when she realizes that something she once had full access to is no longer immediately available. Not because you've disappeared, not because you're punishing her, but because you've shifted, you've reclaimed your energy. You've stopped offering emotional certainty like it's a gift she didn't ask for. That shift, when done with emotional intelligence, is where everything changes. Think about it. The moment you stop over-explaining your every thought, the moment you stop narrating your emotions just to prove transparency, the moment you begin living from a place of inner authority rather than constant emotional reassurance, something profound happens. She becomes curious. She starts to track your energy. She leans in instead of leaning away. It's not a game. It's not detachment. It's an energetic rebalancing. Because here's what we tend to forget: attraction isn't built in comfort, it's built in contrast. In the interplay between what's known and what's unknown. Emotional ambiguity, when expressed with depth, not deceit, creates that contrast. It's what invites a woman into a deeper relational dance. And this is where most men misunderstand. They think showing up means always being accessible. They confuse love with emotional obedience. They feel that being safe means being entirely emotionally transparent. But what many women actually crave is dimensionality. She wants to know you're safe, but she also wants to know you're sovereign. That you have an inner world she doesn't control. That your emotional life isn't on display simply to earn her approval. When you give her everything, your thoughts, your feelings, your schedule, your motives, you remove her need to imagine you. And imagination is essential in love. When a woman has nothing left to wonder about, she stops investing emotionally. Not out of malice, but because the mystery is gone. So what does emotional ambiguity look like in practice? It looks like being fully present in moments of connection, and then being fully present in your own life when you're not with her. It looks like not texting out of compulsion, but with intention. It looks like taking space not to create distance, but to deepen the gravity of your presence. It looks like having an emotional rhythm that isn't dictated by her moods, but informed by your own needs, priorities, and values. It's showing her that while she matters, she doesn't manage you. That while you care deeply, you're not here to be emotionally domesticated. Because here's the truth: when you collapse your mystery in an attempt to make her feel safe, what you often make her feel instead is indifferent. She no longer feels the spark of tension, the thrill of pursuit, the desire to explore who you are beyond what you offer on the surface. You become a known quantity. And that's when she stops worrying, because she no longer sees you as someone who could ever surprise her, excite her, or shift the way she sees herself. Emotional ambiguity isn't coldness. It's not manipulation. It's the art of holding back just enough to allow space for curiosity, imagination, and emotional reciprocity. It's about breaking the rhythm of constant availability so that your presence actually registers when you show up. That's what makes her think. That's what makes her feel. That's what makes her ask herself, what's going on with him? Is something shifting? Have I taken him for granted? Is there more to him than I assumed? And the moment those questions arise, something beautiful happens. She begins to worry. Not in the way that diminishes her, but in the way that reawakens her. She becomes aware of the stakes. She starts to re-engage from a place of wanting rather than assuming. And this is how emotional tension leads to emotional presence. When she worries, she watches. When she watches, she wonders. And when she wonders, she begins to feel that spark again. Not because you gave more, but because you gave less with more meaning. Because the truth is, love doesn't need to be loud to be felt. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let your absence whisper what your presence used to shout. We often assume that the best way to keep someone close is to give them access to all of us. to be endlessly available, completely transparent and totally devoted. But what happens when that devotion becomes dependence? When the emotional equilibrium of the relationship tips so far in one direction that your sense of identity begins to orbit entirely around her. You see, there's something paradoxical about attraction. We're drawn to what doesn't need us. Not in a detached or dismissive way, but in a centered, self-contained way. And this is especially true for women. A woman may enjoy attention, but she is moved by mystery. She may enjoy affection, but she is transformed by the presence of a man who doesn't make her the sole source of his emotional purpose. What really makes a woman worry is when she realizes that she cannot define you, that your world doesn't collapse in her absence, that you are not waiting for her permission to live fully, deeply, and independently, that you are capable of emotional depth without emotional dependence. It's not the man who texts her every hour and says all the right things who lingers in her mind. It's the man who shows up whole, with a life, a purpose, an inner emotional world that isn't constantly available for validation. That man unsettles her, not because he withholds love, but because he isn't performing for it. He is rooted. He is emotionally sovereign, and that sovereignty makes him magnetic. Now, let's be clear. Emotional independence is not about emotional distance. This is not about being cold or unavailable or avoidant. It's about being anchored. It's about knowing who you are when no one is watching, when no one is clapping, when no one is needing something from you. It's about maintaining your center, even in the presence of someone you deeply desire. The tragedy is that many men, especially men who are sensitive, open-hearted, and genuinely loving, believe that to love a woman well, they must collapse into her, that they must become entirely responsive to her needs, her moods, her patterns. But what this often creates is emotional enmeshment, not intimacy. It turns connection into control on both sides. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When a woman senses that your emotional well-being depends on her validation, she loses respect. And when she loses respect, she loses polarity. And when that polarity dissolves, so does her desire to pursue, to worry, to lean in. We talk a lot about high-value men in the language of social media, but rarely do we define what value really means. At its core, value isn't about status or surface confidence. It's about internal containment. It's about being able to hold your emotional experience without offloading it or outsourcing it. It's about knowing when to share and when to stay silent, when to show up and when to step back. It's about being able to be with a woman, present, loving, open, without becoming of her, without needing her to complete you. That kind of self-possession isn't selfishness, it's stability. And it is deeply attractive, because when a woman can't quite predict how much of yourself you will reveal, or when you create the kind of emotional tension that awakens her deepest instincts, you trigger something primal, not fear, but fascination. She starts to ask questions. Who is this man when he's not with me? What does he think about? What does he want? Why doesn't he need me to validate his worth? This is when she begins to worry. Not because you're playing games, but because you're not giving her control. You're giving her the opportunity to feel you, not just receive you. And in that space, she feels the heat of your presence, not just the comfort of your affection. The problem with emotional dependence is that it eventually becomes invisible. You think you're being loving. She experiences it as clingy. You think you're being expressive. She experiences it as performative. You think you're being connected. She feels smothered. And when she begins to feel that your emotional highs and lows are driven entirely by her availability, she stops worrying. Not because she feels safe, but because she feels responsible. And no one wants to parent the person they're trying to desire. So what do you do instead? You live fully. You protect your routines. You pursue your purpose. You invest in your friendships, your creativity, your stillness. You let her know, not through words, but through your being, that while you cherish her presence, you are not lost without it. You become less emotionally reactive and more emotionally regulated. You don't panic when she pulls away. You don't beg for attention when her energy shifts. You remain calm, not out of indifference, but out of trust in yourself, in your center, in your capacity to hold love without collapsing under it. And the moment she realizes that she is not the axis of your emotional world, something shifts in her. She starts leaning in. She starts watching more closely. She starts feeling the kind of tension that makes love electric. And yes, she begins to worry, but it's a healthy worry, the kind that awakens desire, not fear, the kind that reminds her that you are not an emotional servant, you are a sovereign force, and that is rare in the end. What makes a woman worry about you is not how much you give, but how deeply you remain rooted in what you don't give away too easily. Your emotional independence, your time, your energy, your mystery. These are not things to withhold out of strategy, but to protect out of self-respect. And when you do that, when you stay whole in the face of love, when you show her that you don't disappear inside of her, you don't lose her. You draw her closer, but through fascination. There is something profoundly underestimated about absence in modern relationships. In a world that constantly promotes more connection, more communication, More access, we have forgotten the psychological and emotional power of less. And not less is neglect, less is intentional space. Less is pause, less is contrast. You don't become unforgettable because you're always there. You become unforgettable because of the way your presence lingers even after you're gone. Strategic absence, when practiced with emotional intelligence, not manipulation, creates that lingering. And when you understand this as a man, you begin to relate to women from a place of depth rather than desperation. So often men rush to close the emotional distance. The moment a woman pulls back, they panic, they overcompensate, they chase, they call, they text, they flood her with reassurance, thinking that presence equals safety and safety equals connection. But what this actually does is create emotional saturation. It robs her of the opportunity to feel what your absence truly means. And in doing so, it blocks her from realizing how much she values your presence. You have to understand something essential about desire. It is not born in constant availability. It is born in contrast, in rhythm, in what the French call le petit mort, the little death, the pause, the withdrawal, the void that allows the other to feel the presence more acutely. A woman only begins to worry about you when your absence is felt as a loss. Not because you've vanished, but because she's grown used to your emotional gravity. She feels the missing piece, not as abandonment, but as awareness. And awareness is where emotional intimacy begins. You cannot appreciate what you're never at risk of losing. It's important to recognize that the idea of making her worry isn't about creating anxiety or playing games. It's not about ghosting or silence as punishment. It's about revealing value through distance. It's about her realizing that she no longer has automatic access to your time, your attention, your emotional labor. And in that realization, her relationship with you deepens, not just in the head, but in the body, in the nervous system, in the subconscious places where real attachment takes root. Think of your presence as music. If there's no silence, there's no rhythm. And without rhythm, there's no tension. And without tension, the music flattens. It becomes noise. But introduce a pause, even a beat, and suddenly the next note matters. Your absence is that pause. It amplifies your next move. It gives weight to your return. And that weight is what she feels as depth. Many men confuse availability with devotion. They believe that always showing up, always being reachable, always saying yes, is how you prove love. But what that often communicates unintentionally is neediness. It says, my identity is tied to your validation, and no one woman or man is drawn to a person who cannot live without them. We want to be wanted, not needed. There's a big difference. One is desire. The other is emotional dependence. And women, especially emotionally intelligent, self-aware women, can sense this distinction immediately. They don't always articulate it, but they feel it. When you step away, not to punish, not to disappear, but to return to yourself, you create polarity. You create space for her to step towards you. And that voluntary motion on her part, that's where real power lies. So, how do you create strategic absence without falling into manipulation? The answer is inner alignment. You don't step back to get a reaction. You step back because you are rooted in something deeper than her approval. You have a life that calls you, a purpose that moves you, friends who ground you, rituals that feed you. Your world doesn't orbit around her attention. She is a part of your world, not its center. And so when you disappear, even briefly, it's not an act, it's a return to your masculine core, return to silence, to solitude, to your internal compass. And when you return from that place, you bring a different energy, a groundedness, a stillness. A presence that isn't trying to prove anything. And that presence is what makes her lean in. That's what makes her wonder. That's what makes her start to worry in the best way. Because now you've become something she can't quite hold. You're not fully predictable, not fully graspable, and that mystery doesn't create distance. It creates desire. We chase what we can't fully name. We long for what eludes simple possession. And a man who knows how to create that dynamic gently, consciously, without losing emotional integrity, is a man who never has to beg for attention. Sometimes the most intimate thing you can do is walk away for a while, not to cause pain, but to allow her to feel what's no longer filling the room, to sense the silence where your voice once was, the quiet where your laugh used to live, the stillness where your presence once radiated. That's the echo she starts to chase. Not because you demanded it, but because her body recognized that something meaningful had been lost. And that recognition is what transforms casual interest into emotional urgency. We live in a culture that fears disconnection, that rushes to close all gaps, that labels every pause as abandonment. But emotional maturity is learning to trust the wisdom of space. It's knowing that intimacy is not built in clinging. It's built in the sacred dance between nearness and absence. When you give her room to miss you, you give her the gift of remembrance. And when she remembers, not just what you said or did, but how you made her feel, she begins to long. Longing is the birthplace of romance. And romance is what keeps love alive. So yes, let her worry, not through silence, but through self-possession, through the kind of presence that doesn't beg to be noticed, through the kind of absence that speaks louder than words, through the kind of manhood that makes her realize he doesn't need me, but I feel better when he's around. And when she realizes that she won't just notice you, she'll start to fear losing you, not out of insecurity, but out of reverence.